You gave away the house? Her son-in-law Ryan barked, holding the trust documents like they were soaked in gasoline. Eleanor, 68, didn't flinch. No, she said. I redirected it. Her daughter Melissa stood frozen. Her name wasn't on a single line. The will had changed. So had the heir. And the woman they called dead weight? She just walked out, lighter but not empty. Wait, before we go any further I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. I was 3 days out of surgery, still on oxygen. He was in the hallway deciding how fast I should die. The heart monitor pulsed in slow, rhythmic beeps, a steady metronome counting time Eleanor no longer took for granted. The room smelled like antiseptic and orange-flavored gelatin. Her throat was dry, her chest sore, and the gauze on her side tugged with every shallow breath. She wasn't fully awake, but she wasn't asleep either. The door to her room hadn't closed completely. Through the crack, muffled voices slipped in. She's got no income. No assets we can touch until she's gone. The voice was unmistakable. Ryan, her son-in-law. Eleanor's fingers twitched against the sheets. A jolt of adrenaline chased through the fatigue in her veins, waking her with a different kind of pain. Honestly, she's just dead weight. A short, scoffing laugh followed, distant but sharp. The kind of laugh that belongs to someone who already thinks the matter's been decided. She stared at the ceiling, the white tiles blurring behind tears she didn't allow to fall. Outside, Ryan lowered his voice again. Zillow's showing comps nearby for almost $800,000. We just need her, you know. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. A moment later, the door pushed open. Light footsteps, perfume that smelled like peaches and habit. Hey, Mom, you're awake. Melissa, her daughter, her only child. She entered with a paper cup in her hand and a voice that smiled without her face. Brought you chamomile. You probably can't drink it yet, but I thought it'd make the room feel cozy. Eleanor stared at her. Melissa's tone was breezy, practiced. Her eyes scanned the monitors and IV lines like they were trying to mean something. Eleanor blinked slowly. Her voice wouldn't rise above a whisper. Thank you. Melissa tucked the blanket around her feet. Ryan stepped in behind her, phone still in hand, thumb scrolling. Eleanor's eyes locked on the screen for a split second. Zillow. Still open. A 4-bedroom home. Investor opportunity. We're just gonna let you rest, Melissa said brightly. Doctor said you're doing great. Ryan gave a mock thumbs up. You're stronger than we thought, huh? Eleanor offered a small, hollow smile. They left. The door clicked shut. She exhaled, and then her fingers began to tremble. Not from pain, from clarity. She lay in that sterile room for hours, unmoving, as machines kept time she no longer intended to give away. Ryan called her dead weight. And Melissa? She stood beside him like it was normal, like proximity to betrayal made it forgivable. The ache in Eleanor's chest wasn't cardiac, it was grief. Not the kind that arrives when someone dies, but when someone you love dies in front of you, still breathing. That night, long past visitor hours, the nurse arrived. A quiet woman with short braids and careful hands. She didn't speak much, just checked Eleanor's IV and gently repositioned her wrist so the line wouldn't tug. Eleanor studied the woman's name tag, Janelle. She looked kind, not performatively kind, practically kind. Someone who held hands when nobody was watching. Eleanor's voice came out cracked, raw, but firm. Do you know what happens when a will changes? Janelle blinked, then set down the clipboard. Yes, ma'am, I do. Eleanor looked her in the eye for the first time all day. Then I'd like to know what happens next. Janelle adjusted the blanket over Eleanor's chest and said quietly, It depends who you're changing it for. They came with soup and subtle suggestions. I nearly choked on both. The next morning smelled like broth and lavender sanitizer. Eleanor stirred from a shallow nap, her eyes gritty, mouth dry. The fourth hummed with a faint buzz. Someone was fumbling with the tray at her bedside. Mom? We brought your favorite. Creamy mushroom and barley. Melissa's voice was too cheerful. It had that padded tone people used around the frail, the dying, or the inconvenient. Eleanor blinked up. Ryan stood near the foot of her bed, arms crossed, not looking at her. His phone was tucked away this time. His face wasn't smug, just expectant. "You should eat while it's warm," Melissa added, opening the container and tearing a plastic spoon free. Eleanor sat up slowly, wincing as the movement tugged her stitches. Her breath came shallow, but she nodded. The soup smelled fine, but it was hard to taste over the bitter residue of the previous day. Melissa perched on the edge of the chair beside Ryan stayed standing. "So," he said casually, "we've been thinking, might be easier on you if we handled some of the account transitions now." Eleanor paused, spoon midway to her lips. "Account transitions?" "Just so things aren't complicated if God forbid anything happens." His tone was gentle, forced, calculated. "Like the car title," Melissa chimed in, "and the emergency contacts. You're still listed for the house alarm too. It's probably outdated." Eleanor stirred the soup slowly. Barley floated near the rim, soft and swollen. She smiled, barely. "That's thoughtful," she murmured, voice thin. "But I'm not dead yet." The air in the room tightened. Ryan scratched the back of his neck. Melissa laughed too quickly. "No, of course not. We're just being practical." "Of course," Eleanor echoed, then sipped. The broth was lukewarm, and it turned to ash in her throat. When they left, they didn't hug her. Ryan offered a two-finger wave. Melissa kissed her cheek like it was a habit she was trying to shake. The door clicked behind them. The silence was a gift. Janelle entered 10 minutes later with a vitals monitor and a clipboard. "Visitors gone?" "For now." Janelle smiled softly, began wrapping the cuff around Eleanor's arm. Her presence was light, practiced. Eleanor watched her for a moment, then spoke, quietly, but clear. "Is there a notary in this hospital?" Janelle glanced up, surprised, but she didn't ask why. "Sometimes, yes, mostly for advanced directives, or wills." "Can they come here?" "They can, if it's scheduled. Depends what you need." Eleanor didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out the window. The sky was overcast. A branch knocked gently against the pane, like someone reminding her time was still passing, whether she used it or not. "What if I needed a document revised?" Janelle gave a small nod, no judgment in her eyes. "Then we schedule it." Quietly. Later that night, after vitals and evening meds, Eleanor reached for her phone. Her fingers moved slowly, but with purpose. She opened a new text, typed each word with precision. "To Thomas Barnes, attorney, I need a revision packet. Overnight it to the nurse's station. Don't list my name on the label." She hit send, then leaned back into the pillow, pulse steady now, not because she was calm, but because she was ready. Across the room the soup sat untouched on the tray, cool and congealed, just like the smiles they brought with it. "He thought I'd be too weak to sign. I wasn't too weak to remember." The envelope didn't come through the mail slot. It arrived with a nurse aide who looked like she had no idea what she was holding, just a padded mailer labeled "Care Documentation Private." She tucked it beside Eleanor's pillow without a word, not noticing the quick rise in Eleanor's chest as her trembling hand slid it into her lap. It was heavier than it looked, or maybe that was just the weight of what was inside. She waited until the aide left, until the hallway grew quiet, until the only sounds in the room were the soft hum of the monitor and the distant rattle of a cart turning a corner. Then she opened it. Inside, ivory pages, thick and smooth, tabs and markers in neat red ink. Everything was there. The revised will, the trust packet, signature lines outlined in faint gray, a pen capped and tucked into the folder like a weapon holstered for duty. She stared at it, not in fear, not even in hesitation, just in awe at how quickly a person's life could be rewritten with silence, a printer, and legal foresight. Her foresight, because 2 weeks before the surgery, in a rare moment of restlessness, she had said it to Thomas, her lawyer. "Draft it anyway, just in case they show their teeth." And they had. Not with fangs. With smiles. Eleanor rested the packet on her knees and looked out the window. A blue jay flitted onto the railing just beyond the glass, then vanished in a flash of wings. Her fingers itched. but her hands trembled. One wrong motion and the pen would slip. One faltering signature and Ryan's smug smirk would twist it into incompetence. Maybe she wasn't thinking straight. Maybe it was just anger. She touched the pen cap, paused. "Maybe I'm doing this for the wrong reason," she whispered. "Maybe I'm doing this out of spite." A quiet knock came from the doorframe. Janelle stepped in, holding her tablet, about to check vitals, then paused at the sight of Eleanor sitting upright, the folder spread open like a battlefield. "You okay?" she asked gently. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She was looking at the signature line again, eyes scanning her name typed in perfect, legal font. She didn't feel powerful. She felt like a woman one stitch away from breaking. A woman who had once believed love and loyalty were the same thing. "Maybe I should wait," Eleanor said softly. "Maybe I should give them one more chance." Janelle walked to the bedside. She didn't touch the papers. She didn't push. Just said this. "Then don't sig. It for them." She waited until Eleanor looked at her. "Sign it for you." Eleanor picked up the pen. It didn't feel like a pen. It felt like permission. Her fingers steadied, not completely, but enough. She guided the nib to the page, pressing down slowly, each letter drawn like she was carving her name in stone. She signed the will, then the trust packet, then the final page. The silence afterward was different, heavier, not hollow, complete. She handed the pen back to Janelle, who had stood there the entire time without blinking. "Do you want me to get the notary now?" Janelle asked quietly. Eleanor didn't answer at first. She looked down at her signature, crisp, real, final, then nodded once. "Yes, it's time." Janelle stepped out into the hallway, and for the first time since Eleanor had come out of surgery, the door closed behind someone who was on her side. "They accused you of being too emotional. You offered receipts and a pulse ox reading." Eleanor woke early to the quiet clink of medication carts in the hallway. A pale winter sun pushed through the blinds, and she could already tell the day would bring weight, not the kind that bruised the body, but the kind that redefined it. By mid-morning, the hospital notary arrived, prompt, professional, and utterly unbothered by the hum of machines or the IV bags dangling from Eleanor's side. She wore a blazer the color of wet stone and carried a folio that looked like it had settled hundreds of lives with the flick of a signature. Her eyes met Eleanor's with an unreadable calm. "Ms. James," the notary said as she settled into the chair beside her bed, "I understand you're requesting legal verification for a revised estate plan and trust packet. Are you mentally and physically comfortable proceeding?" "I am," Eleanor answered, her voice thin but unwavering. Janelle stood nearby, silent but present, her hands loosely clasped in front of her scrub top. On the other side of the bed, the head nurse, brought in to serve as the second witness, held a clipboard with quiet authority. The documents were unsealed and placed carefully in Eleanor's lap. Each sheet had already been reviewed the night before, but now, as they lay in full daylight, their consequences felt heavier. "Please take your time," the notary added gently, uncapping the pen and placing it beside Eleanor's hand. Eleanor picked up the pen. It felt weightless, like it shouldn't be able to carry what she was about to do. The first few signatures came easily, her hand guided more by memory than by muscle. She signed the new will, then the living trust, then a letter of instruction confirming that her decisions were made with full mental clarity, under no coercion. Then came the last page, the medical directive, the emotional center of the packet. Her hand hovered. For a brief moment, the air in the room grew still. Eleanor's fingers curled slightly around the pen, her breath catching in her throat. Her mind wandered, just for a second, to Melissa's 5th birthday, the blue frosting, the handmade card, the promise she'd made quietly that her daughter would always be protected, even when she didn't deserve it. "I can still love my daughter," she whispered, almost to herself, "and do this." No one interrupted her. The notary remained composed. The nurse looked down, respectfully giving her space. Janelle, across the bed, gave her a small nod. Just once, enough to say, "This doesn't make you cruel." Eleanor signed. When it was done, the notary collected the documents with gentle efficiency. She thanked Eleanor, then both witnesses, and stepped out to file them through hospital protocol. As quickly as she had come, she was gone. By evening, the room was darker. The television flickered in the background but made no real sound. Eleanor had just dozed off when the door burst open, jarring her upright. Melissa stormed in first, her face tight and pale. Ryan followed, his expression already twisted into something too composed to be genuine. "You mind telling me what the hell this email is?" Melissa snapped, holding her phone out like it was covered in filth. "You removed us? From everything?" Eleanor didn't bother reaching for her glasses. She looked at them both through the fuzz of twilight and said calmly, "Because I listened to what you said when you thought I couldn't." Ryan folded his arms and leaned against the wall, trying for relaxed but landing on smug. "You're not thinking clearly. You just had surgery. Morphine messes with memory. This entire thing could be contested as undue influence." Eleanor opened her mouth to reply, but it was Janelle who entered just then, holding a chart. She didn't glance at them. She spoke directly, evenly. She passed her cognitive clearance before surgery. No morphine was administered post-op until 12 hours later. The physician signed the certification himself. It's in the hospital record. Ryan's jaw flexed. "We'll fight this. You'll see." Eleanor tilted her head. Her voice was soft but carried like iron. "You already did. You fought me from the hallway. This," she gestured toward the empty space between them, "is the result." Melissa blinked, speechless for the first time, and somewhere down the hall, a nurse's pager chirped as if punctuating the silence. Ryan opened his mouth to speak again, but Janelle turned to him, voice measured. "Unless you're her next of kin by respect, I suggest you leave the room. They came to pick me up and walk me home, but the house was already gone." The morning Eleanor was set to be discharged, the hospital room felt heavier than it had in days. The linens were changed, the monitor unplugged, and the oxygen tubing coiled neatly on a tray. Sunlight spilled in from the tall, narrow window, washing everything in a soft, golden glow that belied the sharp edge of what was coming. Melissa had texted just after 8 a.m. "We're downstairs. Ryan brought the car around. Can't wait to bring you home." Home. Eleanor stared at the word for a long moment, her phone resting lightly in her hand. The smiley face at the end felt more like punctuation on a trapdoor. Janelle entered with a rolling vitals cart, but paused as soon as she saw Eleanor was already dressed, not in the paper-thin discharge gown, but in soft slacks, a clean sweater, and her favorite wool shawl, folded neatly across her lap. "You ready?" Janelle asked gently. "I've been ready since the moment I heard him call me dead weight." Janelle didn't ask anything else. She simply unplugged the vitals machine, straightened Eleanor's collar with the same careful precision she'd shown on her IV lines, and stepped out to notify the nurses' station. 10 minutes later, as Melissa and Ryan stood near the reception desk arguing about parking validation, a white transport van pulled up to the private drop-off zone outside the cardiac wing. When they saw it, Melissa frowned. "Why'd they call transport? I told them we were coming to pick her up." Janelle emerged first, holding Eleanor's discharge papers. Behind her, Eleanor moved slowly but with purpose, using a single-hand cane and no wheelchair. Her spine wasn't as straight as it had once been, but her eyes were unyielding. Melissa blinked, confused. Ryan's smirk faltered when he spotted the man in scrubs stepping out of the van to open the side door for her. "Mom, what's going on?" Melissa asked, half laughing. Eleanor didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into the small leather handbag Janelle had carried for her and pulled out a sealed envelope. The front was addressed in bold black ink. "To Ryan and Melissa, final property disclosure." She handed it to Ryan. "You may want to open this now. I won't be coming with you." Ryan narrowed his eyes and tore it open, flipping through the contents. 4 pages, stapled, with highlighted sections and legal stamps. It didn't take long for the color to drain from his face. "You transferred the house into a what?" "An irrevocable trust," Eleanor said calmly, smoothing her shawl. "It was filed yesterday morning and recorded with the county by noon." "You can't just—" Ryan's voice cracked. "You can't just give away your house." Eleanor looked at him, unblinking. "I didn't give it away," she said, each word deliberate. I reassigned it to someone who remembers my name without checking Zillow. Ryan glanced at Melissa, his voice now edged with desperation. Is this real? Tell me she can't do this. Melissa flipped through the packet, her fingers trembling. Her voice was barely audible. It's real. Inside the envelope were notarized deeds, trust documents, and a brief summary showing 90% of Eleanor's estate now belonged to a public teacher endowment trust under a local foundation. The remaining 10% had been placed in escrow for a future grandchild's education, one that didn't yet exist. Melissa wasn't listed. Neither was Ryan. This is insane. Ryan muttered, almost spitting. You've been manipulated. From the nurse's station, Janelle stood silently, watching. She didn't move or react, but Ryan's gaze snapped toward her anyway, full of venom. This is her, isn't it? You let some nurse rewrite your will while you were on oxygen. Eleanor stepped forward, her cane thudding softly against the tile. You will not speak about her like that, she said, her voice sharp. She held my hand when no one else did. She kept my dignity intact when you were trying to dismantle it. That's worth more than a bloodline and a deed. Ryan looked like he wanted to say something else, but the words collapsed in his throat. You think this is over? He snapped finally. Eleanor stepped into the transport van without looking back. It is for me. As the van pulled away, Melissa stood frozen, the wind lifting a corner of the trust paperwork in her hand. Ryan didn't pick it up. He was already scrolling on his phone again, searching for lawyers. I came home to a clean fridge, unopened mail, and silence loud enough to bruise. The house low, okayed the same, but the air had changed. Eleanor stepped inside slowly, her cane tapping lightly against the hardwood floors. Each step echoed, not from emptiness, but from absence. The curtains were drawn open, the countertops wiped down, and the thermostat still set to 72. Everything was in place. Two in place. The first thing she noticed was the fridge. It hummed softly, perfectly clean inside. A single half-gallon of almond milk sat untouched on the top shelf, alongside a neatly stacked pack of bottled water and a plastic container of low-sodium soup. But there were no casseroles, no handwritten notes, no welcome home card taped to the door. She moved through the house in measured silence. Her keys clicked against the hook in the foyer, but no dog came running, no voice called out from the hallway. There had been a time when Melissa would have met her at the door, arms wide, too concerned about her recovery to even let her carry her own handbag. That time was gone now. On the front door, taped slightly crooked, was a lined sheet of paper torn from a legal pad. Ryan's handwriting, blocky, smug. Call us when you're ready to talk like a rational person. She read it twice. Once as a mother, once as the woman who had just signed away every piece of leverage they thought they had. Her hand hovered over the note before pulling it down. She didn't rip it. She folded it slowly, precisely, like a receipt you file out of principle. In the living room, everything was dusted, untouched. A candle sat unlit on the coffee table, still in the center where she'd placed it months ago. Her mail was stacked on the kitchen island, unopened, organized by date. Utility bills, a few catalogs, and one envelope addressed in a script she didn't recognize. She didn't open it yet. Instead, she stood at the window and looked out at the garden. The rosemary bush had begun to wither from neglect, leaves brittle, corners dry. She made a mental note to water it later, though she wasn't sure if it would matter now. The garden, like everything else, felt paused, waiting for someone to decide whether it lived or died. She reached for her phone and texted one person. Janelle, I'm home. Made it in one piece. Just tired. But the silence. It's louder than I expected. The reply came less than a minute later. Janelle, don't overdo it today. Rest your legs. Let the peace be yours, not theirs. Eleanor smiled faintly. The ache in her chest wasn't physical. It was history trying to find a place to rest. She wandered into the guest room, the one Melissa used to stay in during college breaks. The walls still held faint shadows where posters had once been hung. A small bookshelf sat untouched, filled with paperbacks from Eleanor's teaching years. She reached out and ran a finger along the spine of pride and prejudice, remembering how Melissa once swore she'd never fall for a man like Darcy. "Ironic," she murmured. She sat down on the edge of the bed and opened her laptop. The screen blinked to life. Notifications buzzed softly. Emails from the estate lawyer, a newsletter she'd forgotten to unsubscribe from, and one new item marked urgent sent just an hour earlier. Subject: Petition of Will Contestation, James v. James and Carter. She clicked it open. Inside was a formal PDF, clean fonts, heavy headers, legal signatures. The words stared back at her like a final insult. Petition to challenge the validity of the last will and testament of Eleanor James, citing medical impairment and undue influence. Below the signatures were the names she knew by heart. Filed by Melissa James Carter and Ryan Carter. She didn't blink. She didn't cry. She closed the lid of the laptop slowly and set it on the nightstand. From the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed on, uncaring. From outside, a bird chirped once and flew off. The silence bruised, but it didn't break her. Eleanor turned off the bedroom light and whispered into the dark, more to herself than to anyone else. "You're really going to make me prove it." They didn't question my love. They questioned my capacity. The envelope was thick, legal-grade paper, hand-delivered by a process server who barely made eye contact when Eleanor answered the door. She didn't need to read the return address to know what it was. Still, she took her time unsealing it. Her fingers were steady now, stronger than they'd been in weeks. The creak of the envelope tearing open felt like peeling away another layer of pretense. Inside, a 12-page petition, signed by Ryan's attorney, endorsed by Melissa. Claimant asserts that Eleanor James was mentally incapacitated at the time of will revision due to postoperative delirium, prescribed narcotic influence, and coercion by third parties with no familial relation. The words were sterile, precise, punctuated with clinical references and fabricated concern. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, the edges of the document curling slightly from her grip. Her tea had gone cold beside her. She didn't touch it. There had been many betrayals over the years, forgotten birthdays, snide remarks, even one particularly cruel Thanksgiving. But this one was different. This wasn't anger. This was erasure. Her attorney, a composed woman named Dana Reed, called within minutes of the email copy being delivered. "We'll respond immediately," Dana said. "I've already pulled the hospital records. The attending surgeon signed off on your clarity of mind post-op. We have the psychiatric clearance, and we have the notary video." "Video?" Eleanor asked. "Hospital protocol," Dana confirmed. "They had you state the date, your name, and purpose of the document before you signed. It's time-stamped and witnessed. It's more than enough." Eleanor listened, nodded, took notes she didn't need to take, just for the rhythm of pretending this was a manageable task. But later, alone, she stood at her bathroom sink, staring into the mirror, the light buzzing faintly above her head. The lines in her face were sharper this week, and the color still hadn't fully returned to her lips. Her chest ached, not from surgery, but from having to prove that her thoughts still belonged to her, that her clarity wasn't conditional, that her agency wasn't a temporary gift granted by proximity to youth. She looked herself in the eye and whispered, "You taught high school for 30 years. Balanced checkbooks without calculators, raised a daughter, buried a husband, and now you have to prove you're allowed to make decisions?" She dropped her head against the cool tile. It wasn't fair. But then again, fairness had stopped being the currency of her family long ago. Flashback. Years ago, in the school parking lot, Eleanor stood between 10-year-old Melissa and two boys twice her size. One had shoved Melissa's lunchbox to the ground. The other had called her fatherless. Eleanor stepped between them with fire in her voice and got shoved in return. Not hard, but hard enough to bruise her shoulder and pride. That night, Melissa wept into Eleanor's lap, and Eleanor had said what mothers say, "I'll always protect you, even when it hurts." Now, decades later, that same little girl had grown into a woman who signed her mother's name next to the word incompetent. By Thursday, Dana called again. The court reviewed the counters. "They want one more confirmation," she said. "A neuropsych evaluation, independent, in person." They still think I'm confused? Eleanor asked quietly. They're pretending to care, Dana replied. It's the tactic. Cast enough doubt and hope you'll fold before court. I won't, Eleanor said, but she closed her eyes as she said it, because the exhaustion had begun to blur even her best intentions. That night she sat in her living room with a blanket across her knees, a fresh cup of chamomile untouched beside her. The house was dimly lit, the kind of quiet that made shadows feel heavier. Janelle had texted earlier, "Call me if you need distraction." Or a bad movie wreck. Eleanor hadn't replied yet. She didn't want distraction. She wanted acknowledgement. She wanted someone to say out loud what this fight had become. A defense not of wealth, but of worth. The next morning, Dana's voice came through the phone, calm but firm. The evaluator's booked for Monday. He'll do the review in your home. Eleanor stared out the window, her voice low but resolute. Good. Let them see where I live before they try to take it away. They wanted to prove I was forgetful. I reminded them who taught the tests. The doorbell rang at precisely 9 a.m. Eleanor had already been sitting by the window for 20 minutes, dressed in a soft blue cardigan and slacks, her hair brushed neatly, her coffee untouched but hot. She didn't rise immediately, not out of weakness, but because she wanted the evaluator to wait just long enough to notice the control of her pace. When she opened the door, a man in his late 40s stood with a polite smile, leather-bound folder tucked under his arm. "Dr. Ibrahim Noor," he said, extending his hand. "Cognitive and neuropsych evaluation. Thank you for agreeing to meet at home." "I figured if they're so concerned about how I think," Eleanor said coolly, "they should at least see the environment that shaped those thoughts." He smiled again, this time a little wider. "I brought standard forms and a few logic assessments. It should take about an hour. No pressure, just conversation and curiosity." She led him into the living room. The fireplace sat unlit, but the space was warm with filtered sunlight pouring through gauzy curtains. On the coffee table sat a stack of newspapers, The Atlantic open to a feature on estate fraud. 2 mugs, one empty, one full. He noticed. She let him. They began with simple tasks, reciting words, remembering sequences. Eleanor responded with clarity, even adding little details that weren't asked of her. "You asked me to remember apple, mirror, penny," she said 5 minutes later. "But you tapped the pen. Twice on penny. Nervous habit?" Dr. Noor raised an eyebrow, scribbled something, then moved on. Next, he presented a numerical puzzle. "A financial scenario," he explained. "Let's say your monthly expenses average $3,800. Your post-tax income is $4,250. How much discretionary income remains, and what percentage of your earnings is being saved?" Eleanor didn't blink. "$450 discretionary, 10.5% margin," she said, "unless I'm forgetting to include my property taxes." "You're not," he confirmed. They continued through vocabulary recall, abstract association, and visual sequencing. Dr. Noor's demeanor remained calm, professional, but there was a visible shift in his posture. He stopped checking his clipboard so often. Halfway through, Eleanor leaned back in her chair. "You know," she said, "I gave these kinds of tests. I was a high school instructor. Pre-algebra, civics, and financial literacy. I used to say, I don't teach math, I teach consequences." He looked up from his notes, interested now in a different way. "That explains the clarity." "No," she said. "The clarity comes from knowing no one is coming to rescue you. It sharpens the mind." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, a single bird pecked at the feeder she'd refilled just that morning. The wind moved the leaves on the maple in slow waves. Inside, the clock ticked, rhythmic, unwavering. At the end of the evaluation, Dr. Noor stood. "I'll file my report today," he said, placing his folder back under his arm. "Doctor," Eleanor said, voice low but steady, "do I seem vengeful to you?" He paused. "No," he said with a kind smile. "You seem prepared." She nodded, almost smiling. After he left, she walked slowly back to the kitchen. Her phone buzzed. Melissa's latest post floated across her screen. "It's hard when people you love stop recognizing family." Eleanor stared at the words for a long time. She didn't comment. She didn't reply. Instead, she walked to the mailbox in her slippers, the gravel cool beneath her feet. A stack of mail waited inside, mostly junk, one utility bill, and a white envelope with official black font. Sender, Family Mediation Services of Redwood County. Subject line, Scheduled Mediation, Eleanor James et al. She held the envelope in both hands. There were no tremors this time. Eleanor whispered to herself, not bitterly, but with calm resolve, "Let's put it all on the table then." They expected tears. I brought spreadsheets. The walls of the conference room were painted in a muted beige that looked like it had been chosen specifically to discourage emotion. It didn't work. Eleanor walked in holding a slim leather portfolio, her posture erect, her breath measured but deep. She wore navy slacks, a crisp cream blouse, and the same watch she'd worn for the last 30 years. Gold, functional, unflashy. The kind people didn't notice until she tapped it against the table for emphasis. Melissa and Ryan were already seated on the opposite side, flanked by their attorney, a man who wore his smugness like an accessory, polished shoes, thin tie, bored eyes. Eleanor took her seat without acknowledging them. Dana, her lawyer, placed a simple manila folder on the table. She didn't open it, not yet. The mediator, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a calm voice, began with formalities. "We're here today to explore possible resolutions to the contestation filed against the amended will and estate trust of Eleanor James." Eleanor didn't flinch. She folded her hands, then slowly unfolded them. Ryan was drumming his fingers on the table. Melissa's eyes never lifted from the legal pad in front of her, where she'd written absolutely nothing. The mediator gestured to Ryan's attorney. "We understand Mrs. James was recovering from surgery at the time of signature," Dana cut in smoothly, "and cleared by 2 independent evaluations, both of which are included in the materials we've provided, along with hospital video footage and timestamps showing alertness and cognition." Eleanor reached forward and opened the folder. Inside, a complete notarized timeline of the revised will, property deed, transfer confirmation trust beneficiary forms, financial control statements, and a fresh copy of her CPA license, still valid. She slid the documents across the table without a word. Melissa looked up for the first time. Her face was pale. Ryan, however, leaned back with a sneer. "You think paperwork replaces family?" Eleanor answered, her voice low and precise. "I think family shouldn't require legal proof of decency." The mediator cleared her throat. "Mr. Dawson," she said to Ryan, "is there a specific request your side would like to propose?" Ryan leaned forward, placing both elbows on the table. "Yeah," he said, "that she stop pretending she's not punishing us. Melissa is her only daughter. This entire arrangement, it's cruel, vindictive. She's choosing a nurse over her own blood." Silence. Eleanor inhaled slowly. "Let I." Ting the pause settle thick over the table before she spoke. "No," she said. "I'm choosing someone who sat with me when I couldn't sit up, who brought water when my daughter brought silence, who held my hand when you were on Zillow calculating what the carpet would cost to replace." Melissa winced. "I didn't know he said that," she muttered, but not to Eleanor, just to the table. Eleanor turned her eyes on her daughter then, soft but unyielding. "You didn't ask." There was no venom, just clarity. The mediator tried to bring the room back to civility, suggesting a possible middle ground, perhaps a one-time disbursement to the family in exchange for dropping the case. Eleanor shook her head once. "No settlements," she said. "Not when what you're asking for isn't restitution, it's permission." She paused, then added quieter, "If this goes to court, I win. Every file, every timestamp, every doctor's note proves it, but you'll lose something I can't return." Ryan leaned forward again, his voice rising. "So, you'd rather give everything to a nurse than your own daughter?" The room went still. Eleanor didn't blink. "I'd rather give it to someone who showed up without entitlement, who didn't need to share my blood to value my breath." The mediator tapped her pen against her notepad, unsure how to proceed. Melissa pushed her chair back with a screech and stood up, blinking hard. But Eleanor's attention was already drifting elsewhere, to the envelope Dana had just slipped into her purse, the one marked, Final execution, version B. They thought I gave it all away. They never realized I had one more version, just in case they changed. The hospital walls had smelled like antiseptic and cold metal, the kind of sterile quiet that made people forget time existed. Eleanor remembered that night vividly, not because of the pain pulsing through her chest or the rhythm of machines keeping her stable, but because of what she decided to do between two heartbeats. Janelle had just stepped out for her break. The room was dim, except for the soft blue hue of the IV monitor blinking in sync with her breath. On the side table, tucked neatly in a plain manila envelope, was the living trust. Inside, nestled beneath the pages she had already signed, was something else. Something most people didn't know you could even ask for. One version, just in case, she had whispered to her attorney over the phone, her voice raspy and low. Not to use, just to have. He hadn't asked many questions, just the right ones. What triggers the fallback clause? Eleanor had been precise, even through the haze of recovery. If they challenge me, if they try to contest my clarity, my intentions, my memory, then version A stands. But if they don't, if they just stay silent, respectful, then version B takes effect. Melissa gets her share. I'd like to believe there's still a version of her that deserves it. Her lawyer's tone had been cautious but calm. It's unconventional, but legally sound. You're adding a conditional disinheritance clause. I'm not disinheriting her, Eleanor had replied. I'm offering her a choice. It's her decision which version of me she'll inherit. Now, sitting alone at her desk with both hands steady, she reread that clause again. The same words her attorney had finalized at her request. Should any party listed as conditional beneficiary contest the validity, capacity, or intent of this will, their share shall immediately dissolve into the alternate irrevocable structure named in Exhibit A. Contestation equates to forfeiture. Malice nullifies memory. Eleanor didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she pressed her fingertips against the edge of the desk, absorbing its smooth surface like it could ground her in the moment. Her breathing remained even. Her spine, straight. Melissa had made her choice the moment she co-signed Ryan's challenge. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that her daughter might see the boundaries not as punishment, but as a signal, a warning wrapped in grace. But Melissa had reacted like someone wronged, not someone loved. There had been 30 days to let it be, 30 days to pick up a phone, ask for clarity, show up at the front door with silence and sincerity. Instead, they had picked a court filing. They hadn't recognized the window, they slammed it shut. Eleanor opened her laptop and composed a single email to her attorney. No hesitation, no second draft. Subject, Final Directive Execution Body. Please proceed with version A. They made their choice. She clicked send. The air in the room shifted. It wasn't relief exactly. It was something closer to closure. The quiet realization that love doesn't always come with permanence, that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is stop trying to rescue someone from their own reflection. She leaned back in her chair, the soft creak of wood the only sound. In the corner of the room, the envelope containing the second version sat sealed, no longer needed. It would never be opened. Its existence had been a test, one Melissa and Ryan never knew they were taking. But Eleanor had known. She'd always known. Just before shutting her laptop, a new email notification popped up at the top corner of the screen. Subject, Media Request, Local Feature on Unconventional Estate Legacy Sender, The Chronicle, Human Interest Desk. Eleanor's hand hovered above the mouse. This wasn't just about the will anymore, it was about the why. They didn't lose the house, they lost the right to call it home. The confirmation email came with no fanfare, no subject line in all caps, no legal jargon that needed decoding, just a quiet sentence at the top of the message, like a sigh after a long storm. Final disposition executed. Conditional heirs removed. Trust disbursed, as per will. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table reading it 3 times, each time slower than the last. The kettle behind her started to whistle, but she didn't get up right away. Instead, she stared out the window toward the rusted porch railing, paint peeling, faint shadows cast in the late afternoon sun. There used to be sidewalk chalk there, little scribbles in lavender and blue, names, loops of hearts. Once, Melissa had drawn a crooked house with stick figures inside it. Me, Mom, and Daddy, scrawled above their heads. The rain had washed it away, eventually, but Eleanor never forgot where it had been. She stood up and turned off the stove before the kettle screamed. The kitchen still smelled faintly of lemon oil from her morning wipe-down. Clean, quiet, still. All the same words that once meant comfort. Now they felt like placeholders for something she hadn't yet admitted. Grief wasn't always loud. Sometimes it just sat beside you, silent and obvious. Her phone buzzed against the table. A new message. Melissa, thanks for the reminder. We know where we stand. No greeting, no punctuation at the end. Not even a name. Just the finality of a sentence meant to be sharp. Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't delete it either. She stared at it for a while, as if trying to read behind it. She tapped once to call. The line rang, then went to voicemail. She waited for the tone and kept her voice soft. Lunch was an offer, not an obligation. I'll keep the table open one more day. She hung up, no expectation lingering in her chest. That had always been the difference, hadn't it? Melissa assumed a relationship came with permanence. Eleanor had learned, painfully, that it came with maintenance, and lately none of that effort had been mutual. Across the room, the envelope from her attorney still sat unopened on the credenza. She knew what was inside. Final paperwork confirming that everything was now legally sealed. The estate, the trust, the one-time gift to Janelle, recorded and wired. It hadn't been a fortune, but it was meaningful. The education trust would fund 3 scholarships a year, indefinitely, and Janelle would receive a single payout, enough to clear her student loans, Eleanor had insisted. Don't call it a reward, she'd told her lawyer. Call it what it is, recognition. The afternoon stretched thin, gold light sifting through the blinds. Eleanor stepped out onto the porch, bare feet on wood worn soft by time. A small bird landed on the railing again, same spot where the chalk once outlined a child's imagination. It tilted its head, looked at her, stayed. She whispered, more to herself than to the bird, "We forget what we drew, but we never forget what we built." She watched until it flew away. Inside, her phone rang again. This time, not a number she recognized. She almost didn't answer, but something in her gut told her to pick up. "Eleanor?" came the voice. Familiar, quiet, almost cautious. "Janelle?" she asked, sitting back down, her knees creaking louder than her voice. "Yes, I didn't want to put this in a message. It's not about the money." Eleanor closed her eyes, bracing herself without even knowing why. "All right," she said. "Tell me." Janelle paused. The silence stretched long enough to worry Eleanor. Then finally, "There's something I never told you. About the day you signed the will, I think you deserve to hear it." Eleanor's hand tightened around the phone, and just like that, the past wasn't done speaking. "She held my hand for hours. I never asked why, until now." The cafe was the kind of place where the spoons clinked quietly, and no one rushed the coffee. Just south of the hospital, it had sunlit booths, low chatter, and a chalkboard menu updated in real time. Eleanor chose a corner table tucked near a window, where the light made everything look softer than it felt. She was early. Of course she was. The server brought water, then tea. She didn't touch either. A small bell over the door chimed. Janelle stepped inside wearing her blue scrubs under a loose gray sweater, her name tag clipped to the front pocket like always. Janelle L. R.N. But this time, Eleanor saw past the uniform. There were shadow under her eyes. Not the tired kind, the kind that comes from carrying something too long without setting it down. They greeted each other with a nod. No hug, no theatrics. Just 2 women who'd sat on either side of death and still showed up. Janelle settled across from her, removing her lanyard and folding her hands. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, voice quieter than usual. "You said it wasn't about the money," Eleanor replied gently. "That got my attention." Janelle smiled, then exhaled slowly, like she had rehearsed this moment, but still wasn't ready to say it aloud. 2 years ago, my mom died in that hospital," she began. Cardiac failure. Sudden. Eleanor's breath caught, not because of the news, but because of how quietly it was delivered. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I wasn't on shift that night," Janelle continued. "Was supposed to be, but I swapped with someone. I don't even remember why. By the time I got there, she was gone. Room 428, just 2 floors above yours." Eleanor's gaze dropped to her tea, her fingers curled around the cup, not for warmth, but steadiness. "So when I saw you, lying there, tubes in your arms, no one at your side," Janelle's voice cracked. "I couldn't change what I missed for her, but I could be there for you. I didn't want another daughter to miss saying goodbye." Eleanor's throat tightened. The words arrived like static before a song, uncomfortable, jarring, but real. "All those nights," Eleanor murmured. "You sat with me while I drifted in and out. You changed my IV, held my hand, fluffed my pillow like it meant something." "It did," Janelle said. "It meant someone was still here." The cafe around them faded into a blur, forks scraping plates, lattes being poured, the occasional burst of laughter from strangers who hadn't just passed through grief. Eleanor reached across the table, not to speak, just to touch Janelle's wrist. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than the room itself. "You were grieving and comforting me at the same time?" she asked, her eyes glassy. "That's what women do," Janelle said, her lips trembling into a half-smile. "We survive, and we stitch someone else back together in the same breath." For the first time since this battle began, Eleanor let herself cry, and none of it was from anger. Not from betrayal, not from loss, just release. She dabbed at her eyes, then reached slowly into her handbag and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. It wasn't labeled, just sealed, weighty, and deliberate. She slid it across the table. "Then you'll understand this next part even better," she said. Janelle blinked, surprised. Her hands hesitated over the envelope. "What is it?" Eleanor's voice was steady now, anchored. "It's what happens when someone gives you more than care. It's what happens when someone sits with you at the bottom and doesn't expect anything in return." Janelle looked down at the envelope, then back at Eleanor. "Do you want me to open it?" Eleanor smiled. "Not warm, not cold, just certain. I want you to carry what's inside, because it was always meant for someone who would never drop it. They expected to inherit the house. I turned it into shelter." The envelope felt heavier than it should have. Janelle held it between her palms at the cafe table, eyes flicking from the cream paper to Eleanor's steady gaze. For a second, she looked like she might hand it back out of politeness, unsure whether she'd earned what was inside. But Eleanor just gave her a small nod. "Go ahead." Janelle peeled open the flap. Inside was a tri-folded set of legal papers, clear, precise, notated in blue ink, and signed with an authority that came from years of decisions made in silence. The title across the top read, "Property Transfer Deed, 41 Willow Street." Beneath it, the name of an LLC, Willow and Bloom Holdings. Janelle's brow creased. She looked up. "I don't understand. What is this?" Eleanor's voice was calm. "I bought that duplex 17 years ago, inherited half of it from my cousin, bought the other half from her ex-husband, kept it under a shell company because Ryan always asked questions about what else I had. Melissa never cared enough to ask." Janelle blinked. "You own another house?" "I did," Eleanor corrected gently. "Now it belongs to a women's transitional foundation. The paperwork formalizes the transfer. It'll be renovated over the next year, then opened as a shelter for women over 45 who've aged out of care or escaped elder abuse with nowhere else to go." Janelle's mouth parted slightly, stunned. "You're listed as a liaison," Eleanor continued, tapping the document, "because they'll need someone who's walked those hospital halls, who knows how to speak to a woman before she learns to speak again." "I'm not—" Janelle started but stopped herself. "I'm not important enough for this." "You're exactly the kind of person important things forget," Eleanor said. "That ends here." The moment sat between them, warm and unspoken. Outside the cafe window, late autumn leaves scraped along the sidewalk. Eleanor watched them spiral. There's one more clause, she added, lifting a second sheet. It was handwritten in soft cursive, a statement of intention. My legacy is not measured in equity but in echo. I give this home not because I have no heirs, but because some women inherit pain they never deserved. May this place hold their healing, not their history. Janelle covered her mouth. Emotional memory returned like a wave. Her mother's empty bed, the unanswered phone call, the way grief got packed into her chest and stored behind her name tag. You wrote this for them? I wrote it for you, Eleanor said. Because someday, one of those women is going to look into your face and feel what I felt. Not pity, not charity, dignity. Janelle wiped her eyes, laughing once under her breath. No one's ever trusted me like this. Eleanor reached out again, slow and deliberate. Then it's time someone did. As the conversation settled into quiet gratitude, the bell above the door chimed again. The barista approached their table and handed Eleanor a sealed envelope. Someone dropped this off for you, ma'am. Said it's from a local paper? Eleanor frowned, opening it. Inside, a short letter, typed. Ms. Eleanor Martin, we've been made aware of your property transfer and the unique conditions surrounding the new women's transitional program. We'd love to speak with you about featuring your story in our December issue. Quiet power like this deserves spotlight. Warm regards, Cassandra Lyle, features editor. Sentinel Journal. Janelle looked at Eleanor, wide-eyed. They know? I suppose word got out. Eleanor smiled, tucking the letter back into its envelope. I'm not sure I want the attention, she said. But her tone didn't match the words. It was thoughtful, not resistant. Maybe it's not about the attention, Janelle said. Maybe it's about giving other women permission to do the same. Eleanor sat back in her chair, absorbing the thought. For years, she had been the silent architect of everyone else's comfort, and now she'd laid the final brick in a house that would outlive her voice. She folded her napkin carefully. Then let them write about it, she said, but tell them this wasn't revenge. Janelle tilted her head. What should we call it then? Eleanor met her eyes, firm but soft. A legacy, one realigned, with grace, precision, and no apologies. The cafe bell rang again, another envelope, this time hand-delivered by a courier in a navy jacket. Urgent legal response for Ms. Martin, regarding a contested property in Willow County. Eleanor raised a brow. They found the other deed. Janelle stiffened. You mean Melissa? Eleanor's voice didn't waver. I mean, they're still trying to win what they lost the right to deserve. They host brunches without me now. I host peace, with a better view. The soil was soft from last night's rain, and the rosemary bushes along the fence line smelled fuller than they had in weeks. Eleanor knelt beside them, gloved hands pressing gently into the ground, coaxing new roots into place. Her knees ached, her back twinged, but there was a quiet satisfaction in the discomfort. Pain that came from purpose, not betrayal. The sun warmed her shoulders. A breeze passed through the latticework of her backyard pergola, stirring the chimes she'd rehung herself. A soft, tonal reminder that peace was possible, even in the aftermath of legal war. A voice called out from the front gate. Delivery for Eleanor Martin. She rose slowly, brushing soil from her gloves, and opened the side gate just enough to accept the bundle of sunflowers handed to her by a young woman in a bright green hoodie. From the union, ma'am, the courier said with a smile. Thank you for what you did for Janelle. Word's gotten around. There was a card tucked between the petals. Eleanor waited until she was back inside her kitchen to read it. The handwriting was neat, careful. You reminded us that protecting others doesn't have an expiration date. Your strength, quiet but seismic, gave us all something to stand on. Thank you. She set the flowers in a glass vase right beside the picture frame that had never moved. Melissa, age 6, missing both front teeth, holding a fistful of sidewalk chalk. Her eyes were scrunched in laughter, her curls wild. Her knees scraped from falling off a tricycle Eleanor had insisted came with too few safety straps. She stared at the photo for a long time, then picked up the letter on the table, another envelope, different handwriting. It was a thank you note, from a young woman named Ashlyn, one of the first scholarship recipients from the Education Trust Eleanor had quietly activated through the endowment clause. Because of you, I start nursing school this fall. I promise to carry your legacy into every room I walk into. Thank you for believing in women like me. Eleanor traced the ink with her thumb. A nurse. The kind who might one day hold a hand the way Janelle had held hers. She placed the card on the mantel, leaning it beside Melissa's photo. The edges of both were sunlit, one past, one future, and in the middle, her. Eleanor made herself a single cup of tea and walked out to the patio with a small plate of apple slices and sharp cheddar. She didn't dress it up. She didn't need linen napkins or matching silver. The quiet was the luxury. The garden hummed with soft insects. The wind rustled the ivy. In the distance, she could hear faint laughter, neighbors hosting Sunday brunch. She used to be part of those sounds. Not anymore, and she didn't miss them. Inside, her phone buzzed. She walked back in and checked the notification. A single email, no subject line. The sender, Melissa Carter. Is it really over? Eleanor stared at the screen. Her finger hovered, not over the reply button, but over delete. A long silence followed. So long she could hear her own breath. And then, slowly, her face shifted, not in sadness or anger, but in clarity. She whispered aloud, almost surprised by how easy it was to say, I'm allowed to love her. I'm just no longer required to reward her. Then she let the phone rest on the windowsill. It didn't buzz again. Eleanor's landline rang, a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something in her gut said otherwise. She answered. A woman's voice came through, measured but warm. Ms. Martin, this is Cassandra Lyle with the Sentinel-Journal. We'd still love to run your story. Quiet strength like yours deserves to be heard. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in thought. She glanced at the card on the mantel again, then to the framed photo beside it. Maybe, she said, maybe it's time people knew what a cosigner really signs. They thought I was dying. I was deciding. The morning light sifted through the old curtains one last time. Eleanor stood in the doorway of what used to be her bedroom. Bare now, the mattress donated, the dresser empty but for a small dent in the wood, where Ryan once dropped a suitcase too hard. That was the weekend they moved in, temporarily. That was 6 years ago. It had taken her far too long to realize some guests don't plan to leave until the host vanishes. She moved slowly, not out of weakness, but reverence. Her cane clicked once on the hardwood before she paused in the center of the room. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was clean. And for the first time, it didn't feel like absence. It felt like ownership. Her lawyer was due in 30 minutes. The final papers had been signed, and the house was already set to transition into the trust's public rental arm. A quiet, respectable property management firm would handle it. Screened guests, short-term contracts, secure stewardship. There would be no more family dinners, no porch photos at Thanksgiving, but there would be safety, simplicity, boundaries. Eleanor exhaled through her nose, steady and unbothered. She'd long learned that people mistake silence for surrender. They think if you don't slam doors or scream back, you've given up. But quiet is where resolve grows roots. She walked slowly through the kitchen, the scent of lemon oil still faint from the deep clean 2 days earlier, the same kitchen where Melissa once sat in a high chair, cheeks sticky with applesauce. She had found a photo of that moment in a drawer yesterday, kept it, slipped it into the manila envelope she'd take with her. Some things didn't need to be erased to be moved past. She looked up. The window above the sink still bore the tiny crack she never fixed. It ran diagonally, like a question mark. She smiled at it now. That crack had outlasted 3 paint jobs and 2 Christmases. She'd once thought it an imperfection, but it had told the truth longer than anyone in this house had. In the hallway, she paused at the linen closet. Gone were the embroidered towels Melissa once bought her for Mother's Day. Eleanor had donated them last week. She kept only the practical ones. Cotton, durable, easy to fold. The sound of a car door outside made her glance toward the front. A young man in a blazer stepped out, her lawyer's assistant. He was early. She grabbed the small key off the mantel, the last one she owned, and walked it gently to the door. As she handed it over, he smiled politely, then offered the final envelope. "Confirmation of transfer," he said. "They'll start showing it next week." "Thank you," she replied, her voice calm, dry as tea leaves. "I won't be forwarding a number. Anything urgent can go through the trust." He hesitated. "Are you sure you don't want—" "I'm sure." She closed the door softly behind him and walked out the back. Her car was already packed. Janelle had helped her lift the boxes yesterday: books, tea tins, 2 framed photographs, 1 small orchid. Enough to start again. Just not enough to start over. She arrived at the new place by afternoon. It wasn't grand. A small rental cabin near a lake, tucked behind rows of poplar trees that rustled like whispers. A wraparound porch with just enough space for a rocking chair. 1 bedroom, 1 bath, and a view that didn't ask questions. Eleanor stepped inside and dropped her keys in a new bowl on a new table. The air smelled of cedar and promise. She walked to the window, opened it wide, and let the wind in. Her voice, more internal than spoken, filled the space like a closing chapter. They called me dead weight, but I was the gravity that held everything together. She took a breath, then another. Then she smiled, small and satisfied, and turned back to her empty home. And now I've given that weight to someone who knows how to carry it.